My presentation today will be focusing on the Hopewell complex of Ohio and their numerous ceremonial earthworks. For this presentation, I visited the Newark earthworks as well as the Ohio History Center's new Hopewell exhibit. Due to the nature of this presentation, I feel it's right that I do a land acknowledgement first. Here I've listed just a portion of the tribal nations which called this land home at one point or another. The term Hopewell does not designate a people and is certainly not a word that would have been uttered on this continent prior to European colonization. DNA evidence has suggested that people from all over the continent may have visited the Ohio River Valley during the Hopewell period. And that spectrum of people would certainly have been much more broad than the European contact, the people that existed in Ohio during European contact, due to the massive numbers of Native Americans that were displaced and killed during that period of European settler colonialism. And this presentation will be showing some of the effects and some of the continuing aspects of settler colonialism in America today. So the practice of mound building was actually commonplace throughout the entirety of the eastern woodlands, such as Cahokia along the Mississippi. However, nowhere is it more numerous or notable as in south central Ohio. The eastern woodlands, as you can see here, consist of everything that's not shaded in. So very vast portion of the continent here. And again, nowhere is it more complex or large scale as it is in south central Ohio. Now that I've gone over the geographic location, I'm going to touch briefly on the time period we will be discussing. I'm going to be talking about the Middle Woodland period, which coexists pretty strongly with the Hopewell tradition. Archaeological evidence has suggested that this was a period of unusual harmony, in the sense that within the Hopewell complex burials, there is so far has been no sign of battle wounds. And this likely explains the massive number of exotic materials that found their way into Hopewell sites in Ohio. And that's something that we will be touching on later as well. It was during this period that North America saw some of the most notable earthworks, mostly, again, in central and southern Ohio. The image I have here in the background is of Great Serpent Mound in southern Ohio, and while it's been debated who exactly built Great Serpent Mound, what is known is that as time went on, Native Americans who encountered it maintained it and respected it. There's evidence of layers of soil that have been added on to the mound to upkeep it over time. And this goes to highlight that site utilization varied considerably between cultures, between time periods, but the common thread is that they respected and revered the great mounds that were built. A couple important things before I move on I need to touch on are, first, I'm going to talk about the 1893 Columbian World Exposition, better known as the World Fair. This took place in Chicago, and it was marking the 400th anniversary of Columbus's landing in the so-called New World. The reason that this is important in the context of mound building is because Mr. Warren K. Moorhead was recruited to find artifacts that could display the brilliance of the American Indian cultures who they were trying to wipe out at the time. And the way that Mr. Moorhead went about this is locating mounds throughout the eastern woodlands, but specifically the Hopewell site in southern Ohio. And he used very hasty and destructive archaeological methods to dig directly into these mounds, discard anything that he didn't deem as important or significant, and then take what he pleased. And he took these artifacts that he found, which later would go on to actually define the Hopewell complex and give it a name, a public name, in a public face, a lot of these artifacts ended up in the Chicago Museum, where they can still be seen today. Um, and the other important thing I'm going to have to touch on briefly here is the lost race theory, which is the theory that persisted in America for about a century following the so-called discovery by the white men, the colonizers, of these Native American mounds. Initially, they thought that there's no way that the Native Americans that they had contact with, that their ancestors could have been able to make these massive complexes. So naturally, in a settler colonial state, they developed the lost race theory, which explained that it was not in fact the Native Americans who built these sites, but a lost race of people who was more intelligent than they were. Um, and both of these points here will greatly impact the history of archaeology and um, it its impact on the Native American community as a tool for oppression. Again, I think it's important to highlight the fact that the term Hopewell does not describe a culture, but rather a ceremonial, religious, mound building movement that swept across the eastern woodlands. Uh, these motifs that define the Hopewell complex took on their own characteristics as determined by geography. However, it seems that the geometric earthworks that were built in south central Ohio, such as those at Newark, served as a sort of American Indian cathedral. And what I mean by that is that they are often capable of holding a massive number of people. I mean, some of these sites can hold up to 20 to 30,000 people at one time. So it's hard to say the true size of the Hopewell complex. So, what exactly is the Hopewell complex? As you can see here, it was characterized by a set of shared yet geographically unique practices, as I mentioned earlier, that took place between 1 CE and 400 CE. Uh, they had vast interaction networks. These weren't trade networks, these were interaction networks, which allowed for the inflow of exotic goods. We don't see the exporting of materials from Ohio, such as flint from Flint Ridge, which is only about 20 or so miles from the Newark site. Um, and we also see distinct styles of crafting objects, such as their utility of mica and shared symbolisms and motifs within their designing of pottery and things such as platform pipes, which I'll should be showing some images here soon of some common motifs within the Hopewell complex of Ohio. So again, I have a map here showing the influence of the Ohio Hopewell complex, most numerous along the Miami River, the Scioto River, and the Muskingum River here, which the Newark site is off of. 8 Hopewell earthworks are currently under consideration for the UNESCO World Heritage List, and that is something that I will be delving deeper into later on in this presentation. But both sites at Newark are currently awaiting approval for the UNESCO World Heritage List, which would draw hopefully massive amounts of income to Ohio, as well as bolster the preservation of these sites and the possibly renew some interest in learning about Native American cultures that existed before contact. As I had mentioned earlier, the Hopewell Mound Group was the mound group that had essentially defined the Hopewell complex. Many of the artifacts taken from the excavation by Warren K. Moorhead in preparation for the 1893 Columbian Exposition. Many of those artifacts went on to set the standard for what exactly is Hopewell versus, say, Adena or the Fort Ancient cultures. And currently, the Hopewell Mound Group is under the care of the National Park Service as a National Historical Park. The image behind me is of, in the background, you see a large mica cut image of a hand that was dug up at the Hopewell Mound Group. And in front of it is a smaller cut of copper in the shape of, again, a hand. And this is just showing, starting to show some of the common motifs that we see within the Hopewell complex at this time. So something I had mentioned earlier was how creating a World Heritage site or multiple World Heritage sites in Ohio would hopefully bolster the preservation of these sites, which has been severely lacking for the past several centuries. Behind me, I have an image of Junction Earthworks in southern Ohio. And Junction Earthworks has, thanks to ground penetrating radar and interpretive mowing, these Hopewell earthworks have been partially restored. This is going to show a current movement towards restoration within the American archaeological community. And again, this preservation has been severely lacking, specifically in Ohio. There's been a lack of legislation to help preserve these as at least historical monuments, all in the name of usually agriculture, but sometimes just to build roads and things like that. These just get destroyed over time. So the rest of this presentation is going to be focused specifically on the Newark earthworks. Again, this is the site. These are the sites that I visited in my free time over spring break, and these are two of the sites that are contenders for the World Heritage List. Again, the World Heritage List requires that a site shows a level of human genius and great levels of human achievement, and I think that both of these sites strongly show that with many aspects of astrological and mathematical achievement, and that's something that I will be touching on more in depth here in just a minute. Behind me is a map, which I'm about to show a larger version of. This was made by Squire and Davis and was part of the first publication by the Smithsonian. So here we get an aerial view of the Newark sites. This is as they were prior to encroachment. We see here this is called the Great Circle. In the center, that is Eagle Mound. And it was believed that there was actually a structure here at one point, which may have been built to hide some certain activities from public view, which would have been presumably outside of the circle. Along this path here, outside of the Great Circle, we have this square here. These are, again, massive areas. The Great Pyramid in Giza would be able to fit comfortably within this Great Circle here, just to give some perspective and size. And along this graded way here, we have this leading into the Great Octagon here. And attached to the Great Octagon, we have what is known as Observatory Circle here, and you'll see in just a minute why it's called that. So I mentioned great mathematical achievement. What do I mean by that, and why should the Newark sites be considered for the World Heritage List? Here I am showing how intentional the placement of these sites actually was. The orange, as shown here, is representative of an area of 20 acres. So both the square and the observatory circle had the same area of 20 acres. The blue is representing an area of 30 acres. So both the Great Circle and a square drawn in the octagon here has an area of 30 acres. So why is it an octagon in the first place? That is something that I'm going to be touching on here in just a couple slides. But what I want to highlight for now is the mathematical precision that went into these sites. The diameter of the orange circle is 1,054 feet. This diameter is the same as the circles at Hopeton, Circleville, and Highbanks, which, to give perspective, Highbanks is 60 miles away. So quickly, I just want to show this is an artist reproduction of what the site might have looked like when it was in use. See that there's this outer circle here that wasn't even visible on some of the earliest maps of the Newark earthworks. And this sort of shows how quickly some of these things were removed. But yeah, I want to note that a lot of the activity that went on within the Newark earthworks was ceremonial in some way. And what I mean by that is it was strictly separated from day-to-day life. As you can see here, some of the villages and the houses and the more domestic activity took place outside of the earthworks, whereas more religious activity took place inside. So I mentioned that the Newark sites had astrological alignments. What do I mean by that? Well, the walls of the circle and octagon are aligned to the points on the horizon, which mark the limits of the rising and setting of the moon during an 18.6-year cycle. What this means is that generations of Native Americans would have been studying these incredibly complex moon cycles, and they would have had to have been very familiar with it on a very wide scale. As I mentioned, some of the alignments were the same across massive distances, such as Newark to Highbanks, which is 60 miles. The image behind me here is showing one of the lunar alignments there, as viewed from above the observatory circle. And this is just one of several of these alignments that must have been absolutely breathtaking to experience at the time, and even still today. So I just showed with that last slide how complicated some of these lunar alignments really are. And right now I want to point out this image on the left-hand side. That is not an image of Newark. That is an image of the Highbanks earthworks. Again, these are 60 miles apart, and they are both the same size, both being positioned at a perfect 90-degree angle from one another as well. So there is great communication and great thought being put into these sites. These were clearly places of gathering for large groups of people. Likely they would have come together in response to the different lunar alignments that these were clearly related to in some way or another. Another note of the significance of the Newark earthworks is something called the Great Hopewell Road. Now, this is a a theory that the earthworks at High Banks and the earthworks at Newark were not only connected in the sense that they had all the same alignments, etc., but that they may have been, in a very real sense, connected via this road. Um, Now, this behind me is a map made by the Salisbury brothers, uh, the ones that made the stake. Um, the Salisbury brothers in 1862 went to the Newark earthworks, and they drew this map, which included about 6 miles of the Great Hopewell Road, which starts at the octagon here, um, and continues in a southwesterly direction. They only followed it 6 miles, but they had said that they wouldn't be surprised if it went on for another 30. Um, these these parallel embankments were about 3 feet high, so it is entirely plausible and quite likely that over a very short period of time, these embankments would have been just completely destroyed by farming, um, and by industry, which was very rapidly taking over at this point. Um, Again, Chillicothe in of itself, which is where the High Banks Works exist, was at one point not only the capital of Ohio in a very uh, modern sense, but it was also, for a very, very long time, the Native American capital of Ohio and arguably of the Eastern Woodlands. Um, Many Hopewell sites exist to this day in Chillicothe, and these these two sites were very clearly connected in multiple senses.
Boy, that's a difficult question, and I might want to. It's not difficult, but it's just almost a wide open question that I could take another hour to answer. Of course, some of the long-term effects are denying access of that site for all that period to a wide segment of the community and to American Indians that might want to and increasingly do want to visit the site. Also, maintaining a golf course today entails putting all kinds of chemicals in the soil, and some of those chemicals, particularly from early on, The Octagon has been a golf course since 1911. So even in that early area, through the 20s and 30s, they put all kinds of nasty things in the soil. So that's going to be a long-term effect. But for me, it's just mostly the issue of access. When you have a crown jewel of a site that's about to become, hopefully, a World Heritage Site, when only a certain class of people can use it for a certain activity and other people are denied access, that's a big problem.